What's up, Internet? Welcome back to the Cigar City Book Club. I'm your host, Thad Diaz, author of the Cigar City Case Files, a hard-boiled detective series set in the city of Tampa that follows the exploits of an active duty firefighter who's a bail bondsman and a PI on his days off. Today, we're talking a little bit about Robert Crais and his contribution to the hard-boiled detective. So let's get started. Now, I mentioned in an earlier segment that when I reread The Monkey's Raincoat, one of the first things that stood out to me was how much it read like an old school 70s or 80s television show. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to look into Crais's writing history. And sure enough, Robert Crais wrote for television, and he wrote for some pretty impressive shows. He wrote for Cagney and Lacey. He wrote for Hill Street Blues. He wrote for Miami Vice, and I mean, these shows aren't just great crime dramas of the decade. They're hallmark shows of the '80s, for which the '80s is known. And all that comes across in his novels because the Monkey's Raincoat still has all that classic private eye um, chemistry that we've had since the age of Chandler and Hammett. You know, you still have the client comes in, they hire the detective, he goes out into the world, works the case, gets beat up, gets lied to, has to sift through the lies and come up with an answer by the end of the story. And this is where Crais's TV bona fides really pay off. Now, it's a common maxim in fiction writing that some of the best fiction writers cut their teeth in the print press, the old school newspapers. And the reason for that is pretty simple. You work on a deadline, you have a very confined space to tell your story, so you've got to be thrifty, you've got to get in and out, not a lot of wasted words. And therefore, when they become fiction writers of novels, their 80,000 words stays at 80,000 words, doesn't become 100,000 words, and they can get it done when they need to get it done. And that translates very well also to the television folks because they have to introduce the characters, the conflict, they have to resolve the conflict, and they have to do it in a way that moves the story along for a 40-minute script and keeps the audience engaged enough so that they don't change the channel when the commercial comes on. So when you look at those similarities, you can see in Crais the strength that he has in pacing, in the way that Elvis Cole follows the clues, and there's constantly something going on that's driving the story forward. We don't have any wasted time. Yes, there are a few very important character beats that come along. Those are very, very important. But that pacing and that, but it is all done in a very economic way that keeps the story moving and keeps the Monkey's Raincoat on course to have this grand finale that is also very TV in its own way. Now, speaking of television, the Cole and Pike partnership feels made for television, right? I mean, Cole, he works the case, he does the talking, gets the answers that he needs. Pike, on the other hand, he comes in when talking is we're a little past the point of talking, right? And we need a more physical form of communication. But it's nice to have that extra layer because it does give Crais's stories something that most previous PI stories don't really have. It's a true partnership. Now, some of you are going to leave comments and say, "Well, that Spencer and Hawk by Robert Parker, right? Spencer came before." And my answer to you would be, yeah, that's technically true. But the thing is, the Elvis Cole and Joe Pike partnership really really is the first true partnership. Hawk is a friend most of the time, right? A friend and ally from the street who joins Spencer when the going gets tough. Pike is an actual partner with his door on on the sign and an office in at a room in the office or an office in the building, and so they're legitimate partners. Whereas Spencer's more of a team up with a friend when he needs it, and so I would make the argument that what really happens is that Crais takes the baton from Parker and kind of advances that a little bit. They're a natural progression, perhaps together, but Crais is the truer personification of an actual partnership. Hawk still and Pike still provide that extra layer of perception that gives you a chance to bounce, to have two characters with friction and conflicting ideas and challenges the reader in ways that you won't have, that will again pave the way for great books like Gone Baby Gone and Devil in a Blue Dress. Now, another thing that Crais does is he brings a lot more action, TV action, to his books, right? It's not like, and that's not to say that the old school hard boiled detective tales or detectives were any stranger to violence. They certainly weren't, right? You saw all the time. Marlowe was getting sapped on practically every book, and there's violence in almost all of those books. But they treated it as something that was sudden, uh, ugly, and it was over very, very quick. A quick fisticut, a quick punch, counter punch, maybe a quick draw, exchange of gunfire, something like that was usually uh, what it was limited to. But Crais gives this violence a bigger platform, and when he does that, and in doing so, he creates this high octane violence and set piece showdowns that feel more like the climax of a Miami Vice episode than it does one of the old Marlowe adventures. And so this changes the equation a little bit. The investigator, well, he's still the investigation, that's still important, but the investigator has to make sure that he survives and solves the mystery. And so those two components become almost equal parts, right? They almost develop an equal measure in the drama. And that combo has become a major part of crime, a major component of crime fiction to this day. And today's fictional detectives do all the things. They they pound the pavement, talk to people, carry the story emotionally, but they also are subject or and play a part in act and violence that would be historically reserved for action thrillers. Right now, Crais hasn't abandoned the hard-boiled tradition by infusing all of this action, and in fact, I would say he's kind of brought it into the modern day, the current day, because Elvis Cole is still hard, tough, street smart uh, detective that's got that tarnished sense of honor, that battered sense of honor we can trace all the way back to Philip Marlowe. And those qualities, they might be packaged a little bit differently, but the core is still there. And, the scenes, yeah, they move more quickly, which is good. I think you'll see that trend in literature as time's gone by. So you have better pacing or faster pacing. And the partnership with Pike creates an opportunity to bounce concepts off of the two characters who might have very different worldviews and provoke some thought within the reader. So I think that's a great thing too. The mystery unfolds with the momentum of episodic television, which makes complete and total sense with Crais's um, background, but it also makes complete and total sense because that's actually the trend that you've seen in most literature with the electronic age, right? And while I completely acknowledge that Crais didn't invent some of these concepts, I mean, we've talked about Spencer, but he has definitely bridged the gap between the old and the new. Him, along with guys like Robert B. Parker and the Spencer series, they kind of together bridge between the old school and the new, and they do it in a way that doesn't take away from Marlowe while bringing those concepts into a modern era. And so, he does add the pace, the chemistry, the action of the modern television, but I don't. But in no way does that change the fact that these are hard-boiled detective stories at their core. So, what do you think? Do you like what Crais has done, or the bridge that Crais and Robert Parker have built, or do you prefer the old school stuff, or do you like something else completely different? Leave a comment. We'll talk about it.